Hey, now it's overtime with Mike and JD, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm joined as always by JD Oliva. How you doing, JD?
Dude, I had a crazy experience today. So I got a direct message from Guy Evans. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, he wrote the Nitro book. Yeah,
He did write the Nitro book, and he direct messaged me out of the blue. Neither one of us follow each other, and said, I am writing another book. Would you be interested in sharing a story that you have about meeting Randy Savage? And I went, how the hell do you know that story? Yeah, I'd love to. So he called me and we had about a long 15-minute conversation about the time I met Randy Savage when I was in high school. And I asked him, I said, how do you know who I am? And how did you hear this? And this guy goes, well, I do my research. I laughed, well, clearly. He said, well, in 2015, you tweeted that you went to Gibson Steakhouse in high school and met Randy Savage and Ted DiBiase. And I went, I did? Because I went through all my articles. I found nothing about this story. You didn't know it, so clearly I didn't tell it on the podcast. So I was like, how the hell does this guy know this? But apparently he's doing a book about just the way wrestlers connect with people through various means, like promos, matches, and all that stuff. And he's got a chapter on Randy Savage. And he says, I just want to hear your story. So I told him my story about being in high school. And I think I told you this, we went to Nitro the night Jericho read the list, right?
yeah,
With the arm bar that was in Chicago. So like we were there for that. And that night my buddy's uncle was the head bartender at Gibson Steakhouse, like the steakhouse in Chicago. And he's like paying for everything. So it was me and my buddies. We were eating way out of our price range that night. And Ted DiBiase, hey, it's Ted DiBiase. And we were watching Ted DiBiase and he picked up Savage's checkbook or Savage's check. And my uncle goes, oh, I've met Randy before. I'll go talk to him. So we did. And he goes, hey, he wants to meet you guys. Come on over. So we got to meet Randy Savage. And he autographed our menus from Gibson's. They had paper menus. So I lost it, unfortunately. But for a long time, I
yeah,
had Randy Savage's signature. And he was a really nice guy. And he goes, yeah, that's the story I heard from everybody, is that for such an intense guy with such an interesting reputation among the business, everyone outside of it, whoever met him, said he was great. I said, oh, that's me. So it's cool. We
yeah.
follow each other now. I'm going to get to read his book before it comes out. I'm super excited about that.
That's cool, man. What an experience. So hold on, I
Yeah.
got to go to Twitter and talk about the time I met Randy Savage. I never met him. I just want to be in on this. I just want to get the
Well, I'll hook you up with the PDF.
book.
But yeah, it was
Yeah,
pretty cool, man. So now we follow each other, and at some point, I'm gonna weasel him over to something I'm doing. So, pretty neat shit.
yeah, yeah. Did you let him know that we reference
Nah,
his book often? Like,
um, it didn't seem. It never like he. I don't know if he knows I'm a podcaster and stuff like that. So I didn't like
yeah,
bring. Just I don't know if he picked me out because I'm in the wrestling space or if this story just coincidentally showed up because like I wrote that before I was joking about using the phrase in this space, but I did it so much as a gag that it's now become part of my actual vernacular and I'm not happy about that. But yeah, I don't know if it's now in there, if it's just because it sounded like a cool story. So either way, cool for me.
yeah. That is really cool, and we are an admirer of Guy Evans. So
Great book.
kind of cool that you got a chance to talk about him, yeah,
Yeah.
or talk to him. Yeah. So the reason why we're actually here. We're live on a Sunday night. And we typically would record overtime on Thursday nights after we get done with the Mike and JD show. But we went a little bit late that night, so we're here on Sunday night, and we're doing our overtime show, and we're talking the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. So each week we've been doing kind of a series, but now it's time to get your ballots in. So we talked about a few cases that I felt like might have been bubble cases with Roman Reigns, Bobby Davis, and Ishii, and we had read some stuff that colleagues of ours at the Voices of Wrestling, and then of course our buddy John Muse had written on Ishii, and so we want to plead their case on our show. Well, now we're just going to do the whole show just dedicated. These are the people we would have voted for, and I'm pretty excited about it. And I think the goal is to send it over to Dave for us to actually get ballots next year.
This is Mike and I's not so slick way of trying to get on Dave's radar. Neither one
Yeah,
of us are slick about it. Neither one of us are trying to pretend to be anything more than we are, which are, shameless self promoters.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm super excited. So
Me too.
we're gonna go down the list of the categories, and then we'll just pick our candidates from each category, and we're gonna start with I followed the historical performers era candidates, performers meaning in ring performers, and you get 8 maximum. I'll read the names off here, and I want JD to go first and tell me who he picked. But we got Ole Anderson, Bob Armstrong, Tully and Arn, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, the British Bulldogs, June Byers, June Byers, a Wild Bull Curry, Junkyard Dog, Cowboy Bob Ellis, Pampiro Firpo, Black Gordman and the Great Goliath, Archie the Mongolian Stomper Goldie, the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart, Sputnik Monroe, Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch, the Texas Outlaws, Argentina Rocca and Miguel Perez, Johnny Rougeau, Iron Sheik, Tiger Jeet Singh, Sergeant Slaughter, Steamboat and Jay Youngblood, Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon, the Von Brauners and Saul Weinergroff, and Kerry and Kevin and David Von Erich. All right, so you get 8, JD. Who were your 8?
I picked 7.
Okay.
You don't have to pick 8. I picked 7 because there are other. I left one open because I could be sold on something else. So
Yeah.
here are the. Do you want me to go all 7? Or do we want to go 1? You go 1. I go 1. How do you want to do this?
Just tell me your list and I'll tell you my list.
I'll tell you my list. So I justify or just tell you the list.
Just tell me the list, and if we have a difference, then we'll talk about it.
Okay. Number 1, I went with the British Bulldogs. I went number 2, the Junkyard Dog. Number 3, the Mongolian Stomper Archie Goldie. Number 4, I went with Sputnik Monroe. Number 5, I went with Rocca and Perez. Number 6, I took Sergeant Slaughter. And number 7, the Von Erichs.
Okay. I like your list. So for me, number 1, I also went the British Bulldogs, and then I went Junkyard Dog, and then I took Argentina Rocca and Miguel Perez. I went Johnny Rougeau because I've read a lot of Pat LaProde's writing, and he especially in the Andre the Giant book, so I know that's the difference that we had. I also took a Sergeant Slaughter, and then much like you, I went to Kerry, Kevin, and David Von Erich, the Von Erichs. The Von Erichs one was a weird one for me, because I guess when I read it at first, it was Kerry and David, and I was just like, it's kind of weird. Like, they didn't really team together that often. They weren't like a full-time tag team. They kind of mixed and matched the brothers. But when you put all 3 of them, I'm like, oh, absolutely singularly. I don't think none of the 3 deserve to be in, but as a trio, the things that they did, I felt like they deserved to be in. I thought they were, it's very short-lived, but honestly, kind of in my head, a no-brainer.
So I didn't pick, and I thought about Johnny Rougeau, especially after listening to what Dave said on his show this week, but I didn't pick him because I'm not as familiar with him. So I didn't, it felt to me like I was just kind of going along with the flow by voting for him, but I left that spot open specifically for Johnny Rougeau because I felt like if I heard a good argument and my vote did matter, I could put one in for Rougeau. But the others I feel really strongly on because I feel like I know enough about all of them.
You know what? And I know what you're saying. I know why you picked Sputnik and Monroe. You want to go ahead and say you picked him and educate the audience that might not know who that is. And I'll tell you that why I didn't. But honestly, I have some spots open to where I could be arm twisted too.
So the reason I picked Sputnik Monroe, and I think that we talk about draw, we talk about length, we talk about worker, but I also think impact is probably the most important thing. Of course, impact rates for impact. No, I think an impact of a performer means more than anything else. And what Sputnik Monroe meant, not just to wrestling, but to the civil rights movement, is why I chose him. And so Sputnik Monroe was a main eventer in Memphis in the 1950s, and he was one of the top draws. And what made Monroe interesting was at the time he was a top guy in Memphis. And I'm forgetting the name. It wasn't the Mid-South Coliseum. It was whatever building they ran that predated it. And at the moment it's late here in Chicago and I'm forgetting what it was. I forget the name of the building, but the balcony was sold out and the lower bowl was not. And it was the black fans that were coming out to watch Sputnik Monroe. So they steered into it. It was Roy Welsh, of course, the booker. He steered into it too. So Monroe was cutting promos about how he wanted his fans and his friends to be sitting down in the front with them so he could celebrate, right? And they actually successfully integrated the arena. And it was the first major thing in Memphis to be segregated, or to not segregated, successfully integrated, not segregated. It
Yeah.
was segregated. They integrated it. They successfully integrated the arena, right? So you did have black fans sitting with white fans cheering Sputnik Monroe. And again, people, some of the, like the hardcore, like, um, racist, let's just call them what they are, were anti Sputnik. That's how the term Sputnik came up. Was he was like, because people were so mad about him, is like, you're an enemy, you're a Sputnik, because Sputnik was the satellite that the Russians launched into space. They were
Yeah.
calling them communists. That's where the name Sputnik Monroe comes from. Great name. So I think that because in the 1950s, to successfully have anything integrated in a city like Memphis is amazing. And the fact that the first thing to kind of started chipping away at that, because you're talking the early days of the civil rights movement. And the fact that pro wrestling was one of the things that started tearing down those walls, I think means more than how long. And again, Sputnik Monroe was a top draw in that territory. He drew in Texas, but he wasn't like a big guy all over the place. But I think what he meant in that moment is far more important than what someone drew in their career. Like, this guy was the first block of of integration, right?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is
In
important society.
for
That's important
for
for
for that
history.
city, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
for that city he was. Yeah. Like it didn't trickle down to Birmingham and all these other
No.
territory like that had the same. It was in Memphis. So and I totally get what you're saying. And he very much was important to that city. And I'm a big fan of the history of Memphis wrestling. I've done a lot of reading on it, and I just got the impression that as far as important figures in there, he wasn't even one like close to the top. He was, kind of several layers down. And from what I read, and from I remember the Cheap Heat. Did you watch the Cheap Heat documentary?
At the Memphis
Have you ever
documentary,
seen that?
right?
This is Memphis Heat, not
Yeah, I
Cheap
saw
Heat. Memphis Heat. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, Memphis Heat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So just from the different things I've read about him, because I became fascinated with his story, that his motives were more financially driven than they
It's
were to
wrestling.
make history. I know. So it's like he didn't really do that to be noble. He was just doing that to make himself some more money. And so I'm like, okay, I get it. He's putting his ass on the line to get paid. He wasn't really putting his ass on the line to change history. But in doing so, he still changed history. And so that's why I was like, okay, yes, but that's it's one of those yes buts. But I can my arm can be twisted if somebody that was from that era and from that city could make a great case for him. I could have my arm twisted pretty easily.
Lincoln wasn't an abolitionist either, right? Abraham Lincoln was elected to preserve the Union, right? He was the middle of
Yeah,
the road guy, and he winds up becoming the hero of the Civil War because the not accurate, but not historically accurate, but the story is he frees the slaves, right?
yes,
So I mean, like, sometimes history takes people who don't want to play roles in it or may have other intentions and place and thrust them into the center of things where their nature comes out. Because Sputnik Monroe was going to the black clubs. Like,
yeah,
Sputnik Monroe was hanging out with those people. He did make friends with them. His goals might have been financially motivated, but he also helped start the career of Norvell Austin, who basically was his gimmick son,
yeah.
right? So I mean, like, what started out as a gimmick becomes very much his real life, and he does have fights with people defending like black people in
He he oh
the segregated
he does.
South. So I
And
mean,
he
like,
and he and he absolutely got arrested
yeah,
too doing that. Yeah, yeah. So I like I said, I can be talked into to Sputnik, and I'd be curious to see what kind of percentage he gets,
me too.
because I think that is the one of the arguments against him, because like he's gosh, I'm trying to think of all the different names that have come through there. Like I wonder if even if the people that know that history very well would even put him in the top 10 of Memphis wrestling all time. I don't know that they
But it's
would,
like,
but I
I mean,
think
like
it's
I
a
said,
curious argument.
I think that it is. I think there's some things that weigh heavier than like work rate, things that weigh
Yeah,
heavier than, well, how long were you a good draw for? When the impact you have, and I think there is something we said for people that have like I love Gail Sayers, right? Gail
yeah,
Sayers had a very short career, but he had an impactful career here in the city of Chicago, right? And I think that what you do on a smaller scale means a lot carrying forward, and what that meant a lot in the world. Like He's part, like, again, that wasn't his intention, but it's what wound up happening is he winds
Yeah.
up playing a role in legitimate change. Like the world of 1956 is different than the world of 1966, right? And Sputnik
Yeah.
Monroe is a small chapter in it, but he is a chapter. And I think that chapter alone is worthy of a spot in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. I really believe that. That's one I didn't
Yeah.
even think twice about voting for.
Yeah, no, you know what? I think I might be with you. But I would recommend you doing some looking up some of Pat LaProd's
Oh,
writing on Johnny
I
Rougeau. He's dude, like as far as if you want to talk about a long-term draw as a star and then as a promoter and then all the things that he did in Montreal, like he basically was Montreal
mhm.
wrestling. And the fact of the matter is, and I know Dave said it on his show, but I had my ballot already for Johnny Rougeau before I even heard Dave's show this week. So I absolutely 100% I'm a full believer that Johnny Rougeau belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I can be sold easily on Johnny Rougeau. I haven't read Pat LaProd's stuff personally. Like I
Yeah.
trust a lot of people. There's a lot of people I trust, like yourself included, who say good things. So I can, if someone says, "Hey man, you need to vote for Johnny Rougeau," I'd be like, "Okay," and I kept that spot open. I voted for 7 intentionally,
Yeah.
specifically so I could keep a spot where if someone needed to sell me, because I'm sure when John hears this, he's gonna be like, "You guys need to think about this, this, and this." So
Yeah. Yeah. And then just I don't want to stay on in this one too much, but Sergeant Slaughter, I think, was kind of a I don't see that I see the arguments against him because of the AWA run that he had and the fact that his run with Hogan as the WWF champion didn't draw what they thought it was going to draw. I don't blame Slaughter for that though. I
no,
blame the angle. So
I think
and the fact of the matter is he was a big time draw, not only in the WWF in the early 80s, but also in Mid Atlantic, right, with him and Don Carnoodle as a heel tag team. He was a big time draw. I think that he deserves his rightful place in the Hall of Fame.
I think we give the promoters credit when things go right, but when things go wrong, we blame the talent. It's the Sting argument, right? Well, Sting wasn't
Yeah,
a great draw. Well, fuck, man, you draw with the Black Scorpion. Like
yeah,
and I believe Slaughter's in this category too. Because here's the thing: in '84, he is the top draw in WWF over
hmm
Hogan because he's the one who's actually doing real programs. Hogan doesn't work a program until 1985. Hogan's first real story is with Piper, and that's a year
hmm
after he's been champion. Like Slaughter's the one doing the work with the Iron Sheik. The Iron Sheik never has a real program with Hogan, but he does have one with Slaughter, and Slaughter was selling tickets, right? And in towns that Hogan was struggling to draw, and Slaughter came in and was doing good. Slaughter was such a draw that G.I. Joe, Hasbro, went to him to make him not just a part, not just a gimmick to like a toy to sell. Because again, Chicago guy, William Perry was a toy that you could buy. You had to send away for your William Perry doll,
hmm
the refrigerator. William Perry never was on the TV show. Not only was Sergeant Slaughter on the TV show, he is the leader of the G.I. Joes in season 2. He is the focus of it. And he is so successful, he literally doesn't need Vince. He's the first guy to go to Vince McMahon and say, I don't need you. I'm going to make money on my own. And he did. He made money with Hasbro, and then he was doing stuff in the AWA when they were still drawing, right? And then he did independent stuff with him and I think it's Kirshner playing the assassin, the Cuban assassin at the time or something like that. Like they're going around the horn doing that. So or was it Coronado? It might have been Coronado. I forget off the top of my head. And like here's a videotape that I owned as a kid. It was Sergeant Slaughter versus Bigfoot. Right. I worked for Feld
I know.
Motorsports for years, right? And I did TV commercials for Monster Jam and stuff. And so we had this video. I found this in the archives. They had a tug of war with Slaughter and a bunch of like steroided up dudes. I don't know who they were doing a tug of war with Bigfoot. It's perfect gimmicky stuff. But that's the draw that Slaughter had after he left WWE, where
hmm
a company like Monster Jam, or I forget what they were called in the 80s, could go to him and use him as a draw to sell VHS tapes. And then when G.I. Joe launches a syndicated run, Slaughter is the focus. Slaughter's doing the wraparounds. Like Slaughter is the show, the actual Slaughter, not just the cartoon Slaughter. He's the star of the G.I. Joe movie next with Don Johnson, who played Flint. Like he was a major draw on his own without the WWF machine.
Mhm.
So, I mean, like, you find me another guy in the 80s who didn't, like, when Vern Gagne was dying out, Slaughter's doing fine on his own. I think that alone, before the aborted run, which again was bad creative, that's not on, I don't think it's on Bob Remus at all.
No, no, yeah. All right, next category. I followed the modern performers in U.S. and Canada. You get five. You get five maximum. So here's the list. We got Mark and Jay, the Briscoes, Young Bucks, Edge, Goldberg, the Hardy Boys, Becky Lynch, John Moxley, Holland Nash, Paul Orndorff, Randy Orton, Seth Rollins, CM Punk, Roman Reigns, Trish Stratus, and the Steiner Brothers. Who you got, JD?
So I also picked 4 on this. I kept myself one spot open just in case. And I got a real hard time voting for people who are still going, who are still
Yeah.
like in the middle, like in their prime, because they feel like their stories aren't written yet. And I made one exception to this, but I really don't want to put people in the Hall of Fame that still have a great body of work ahead of them. But the 4 I chose were, I chose Mark and Jay Briscoe. I chose the Young Bucks. That's the exception to my rule. I don't think you can ignore the impact that they had. I chose Paul Orndorff, who I thought should have gone in last year. And I chose Rick and Scott Steiner.
Cool. So I chose Roman Reigns, the Steiner brothers, the Young Bucks, and I chose Orndorff and Randy Orton, actually. So I went I went Randy Orton. A lot of people aren't going Randy Orton, but I just have happened to just always enjoyed his stuff. So and they're like, what's the statistical argument? Was he ever the it's like, no, but he's always been one of the top guys in the top promotion for 20 years. As far as star ratings go, he's he's not your star ratings guy, but he's been a big time main eventer in a lot of big events. And I know people really devalue being in the WWE, and I get that. I just don't have that same opinion.
Can I say that Randy Orton is one of the only guys who, when he becomes champion, business has consistently gone down?
I'd like to see the evidence of that. I hear people say that, but I just don't know that it's actually been a good study. Now, if people
Yeah.
can point me to an article that's been thoroughly vetted and studied, I'll take a look at it. But then we also have to figure out what exactly else was happening in that company. Was he the reason why it went down, or was there a lot of other reasons at play? Right?
I
Because
think
that's also the Sting argument.
that is, well, it's different though, because WWE is, since Randy Orton has taken over, like in his era, the isn't the draw, WWE is the draw, and that's what they were building. But you can't argue Cena was a draw, right? So
Yeah.
because typically when Cena doesn't have the belt, who has the belt? It's typically Orton. And
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I can't find a more dull as dishwater pro wrestler than Randy Orton to me. So
See,
I hear that argument and I go, there's better.
I've always enjoyed his stuff. I see him as a guy that got 3,000 hits in baseball. That, you know what I mean? Batted 300, 3,000 hits. Was never the MVP, right? But he just longevity, and it was just a real good for a real long time. And this Hall of Fame is kind of centered around the Baseball Hall of Fame, and so that's just kind of the way that I see it. I don't know. I've just always liked the guy, and I've just never understood why people would just like hate the guy. But the Young Bucks, I honestly don't see an argument against them other than the one that you had brought. That they're still kind of going.
Yeah, so when I could come up, I mean, like, you just can't deny the impact they had, especially in independent. If AEW never launches, I still think they go in, right?
Yeah.
What they like, I know, like now the hot topic thing doesn't seem quite as important, but in 2018, that's a big deal. That's a big deal that they launched that they were able to get an independent wrestling T-shirt. And again, the Bullet Club, you can say, well, they was around before. The Young Bucks have made it cool in the U.S. Remember, Kenny Omega wasn't here until AEW came about. Kenny Omega lived in Japan and in Winnipeg. He never had a place in the US. So he wasn't touring here constantly. It was the Young Bucks that did. I know like it sure seems like they don't care anymore when they're on TV. Like,
Yes.
I can't see them like inspired by the Young Bucks have done recently, but just the stuff they did from Ring of Honor and PWG, and that in the 2010s, I don't think there's a more important act in professional wrestling than the Young Bucks. An era where the WWF had such a stranglehold on professional wrestling, to stand out and to achieve and to make money and to prove yourself a draw without that machine behind you in that era is unprecedented, and it'll never happen again. So I mean, like, I don't know how you can deny what those guys did.
Yeah, they were big draws in spite of the fact that they were with Ring of Honor,
Mhm.
which is why I didn't really go with the Briscoes. I can be talked into the Briscoes later, but I just didn't think that I wasn't willing to take off somebody from my ballot to add the Briscoes. And I'll be honest, like if you're asking me who I like better, I like the Briscoes better, but I also wasn't really like the biggest Ring of Honor fan. I just know the historical importance of the Young Bucks, and I'm obviously a big fan of a big fan of theirs too. Notably absent from both of our ballots, and I think we have the same reasoning behind this is CM Punk.
I think that if you'd asked me this 2 years ago, I'd have said he's instant. I think that he has done more to damage his brand and damage
Mhm.
the AEW brand in the last year. Like he is a net negative in
Yep.
professional wrestling right now. I know some of the circles we run in, the Impact people want him in really, really badly. And I think that shorts, I know you specifically want him in really bad, but
Yeah.
your reasons are
Yeah.
selfish. Your reasons are
Yes.
selfish. Like you want it because it's
Yeah.
going to make the show better. There's people
Yes.
that want him in there because they think that Impact or TNA, excuse me, needs CM Punk. And I think it's only a matter before CM Punk becomes CM Punk and tries to tear down everyone around him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I know. No. Yeah. I totally agree. And yeah, I honestly, if I voted last year, I probably would have voted him in because of, if you're talking about, and I think that, they talked about it on the Observer, but him and Edge are kind of very similar in
yeah,
that they
very.
took a long time and then they came back. Edge didn't draw when he came back.
Mhm.
Now I'm not saying Edge shouldn't ever be a Hall of Famer. I'm just saying I'm just not ready to vote for him yet because I only have 5 votes in this category. So, but if I were to pick one or the other, I'd pick CM Punk over him because Punk came in and drew immediately, but since then he's kind of tanked his career. He tanked AEW, and they're worse off for it. Now
He stopped
I
drawing.
did, yeah, he stopped drawing, and now AEW has kind of just been like domestically has been kind of on the downhill slide
Mhm.
ever since his latest incident. Now we both voted for Rick and Scott Steiner. Look, guys, I get it. Rick Steiner's a piece of shit. He's a
Mhm.
very rude person, right? I'm a Giselle Shaw fan, and honestly, I wish somebody were there to whoop that man's ass the way he treated Giselle Shaw. However, I can't not ignore the fact that the Steiner brothers were fucking awesome. I just can't do it. I can't look at this list and be like, and not be able to vote for them. Now, so people can hate me for that. I don't know. Whatever, but I love the Steiner brothers. They were my favorite tag team always growing up, and doing some research on them about how the stuff that they did in Japan and how they were able to draw in Japan and all the stuff they did in WCW. WWF run kind of hurts them a little bit, but I still remain just a big, huge fan of theirs. And then their influence on professional wrestling is still seen to this day, right? So they still had that positive influence. Like I know Scott Steiner didn't invent the Huracan Rana, but that's the fucking Frankensteiner, dude, and that's his move, and it's in every single match now because of him.
Yeah. And I think that those guys in an era where pro wrestling was dominated by lumbering dudes with matches, which
Yeah,
again, which made the Bulldogs special, right? They're on the level of the Bulldogs to me, just in like their level of influence and the type of matches they had. These were two really athletic, really strong dudes that could move their bodies in ways that we didn't see in US wrestling. These guys were Japanese style wrestlers that were lighting it up in WCW and had, despite what the WWE run might have meant money wise, they had really good matches, or as good a matches as you can have in WWE in 1993, right? They were doing stuff that Vince McMahon couldn't wrap his 1993 head around what Rick and Scott Steiner were. But they're over from the moment, like people always knocked on WWF fans because they wouldn't know who was who. When Rick and Scott Steiner show up, people are like, hey, the Steiners, like, and
yeah,
then they got over on their own because they're freaking awesome. Like,
yeah,
I don't, and this is kind of why I picked the Briscoes too, is I think that influence is important. And I think the Briscoes actually might be a little bit better performers in that the Briscoes could do different kinds of matches. Like Rick and Scott do Rick and Scott Steiner matches. The Briscoes could do just about anything. The Briscoes
Yeah.
could be violent Southern heels. They could be beloved baby faces. They could work Japanese style. They can work hardcore, and they did it up to the end. Like they had the best chain match. I don't think they had the best. You call it a dog collar match? It's a chain match. They had the best chain match in wrestling history with FTR,
Hmm.
right? And they could
Yeah.
do anything. Those guys could do anything. Now you could say, well, they're in Ring of Honor their whole careers. I mean, one, they didn't have to. And they actually helped Ring of Honor stay relevant because Ring of Honor could fade away as an indie very easily. The presence of Mark and Jay Briscoe helped them exist and help them stand out. And if not for a stupid comment that Jay Briscoe makes a decade ago, they would have been day one AEW players,
Yeah.
and they would have
Yeah.
had a chance to make that influence matter even more, right? Because it's not a coincidence that after Jay dies, that Mark's all over AEW TV and
Hmm.
being awesome still. Like the
Yes.
package of Mark and Jay, I mean, they're the best tag team of their generation. And I don't think, I mean, like, I voted the Bucks. I think the Bucks' business influence outweighs the Briscoes, but I think the Briscoes ring performance from like the variety of type of matches they can have is more important, is like more valuable. Like I would rather have Mark and Jay on my show because they can do whatever I need them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, just because I didn't vote for them right now, that doesn't mean I don't think they should be in. Like, like you're not going to get me to say a goddamn thing that's bad about the Briscoes. I love those guys. So, I just said probably not on this vote, but on the next one, most likely. Absolutely.
Well, I can't kick you for voting for Roman. Like
Yeah.
Roman matters. Like I know
Yeah.
people will fight it, but I mean, like he's the top guy in the middle of a boom,
Yeah.
right? And he's a
And
guy who matters. Like,
yeah, I think, he, maybe he wasn't first ballot, you know what I mean? Like, but he's right up there, man. And I think this latest boom, he was just a no brainer for me. I don't really see the argument against him. But other
no,
than the one that you're saying is that he's still pretty much active and in his prime. But
yeah, I can't vote for him because, like I said, the story isn't done, and I want to see how his story closes. Like he's already moved into part time status a little bit. Like
yeah,
I think that his lack of the fact that he isn't on WWE all the time, it hurts them a little bit because you see their growth has stopped, right? As far as like attendance and like ratings, stuff like that. Like it was growing all of 2022, late 22 into 23, and it's paused, right? They've
yeah,
paused and they're starting to contract a little bit. And I think a big part of this was Roman's not on these shows because when he is, things tend to tick up. Now, it didn't, did he get more chances than most people? Yeah, look at him.
yeah.
And I think what hurts Roman is that he's in WWE with his perception. I
Hmm.
think that if that guy was in Ring of Honor during the time of his career, was in TNA, I think people would have a much different outlook on him because he is a really good wrestler. He is a really good performer. Like the
Yeah.
fact that he's the chosen one works against him. And by the way, you know who put that influence on him was CM Punk.
Yeah, yeah. CM Punk absolutely tried to tank his career by spreading bad shit about him. All
Mhm.
right, let's go to the I followed wrestling in Japan category. We got the beauty pair: Shima, Kojima, and Tenzan, Yoshiaki Fujiwara, Hayabusa, Inoki, and Seiji Sakaguchi, Ishii, Meiko Satomura, Shingo Takagi, and Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada. JD, who you got?
I only voted two. I voted Ishii and I voted for Hayabusa.
Yeah, I voted Ishii and I voted Shingo Takagi. And I know a lot of people voted for Beauty Pair. I just am not that familiar with
I don't
them.
know
So
about him.
but I am familiar with I'm familiar with Ishii and Takagi. I'm so Hayabusa was a weird one for me, and I know his influence is kind of, we're seeing it all over the place. Just his run just wasn't really that long. But I can be talked into Hayabusa, honestly. Like, I'm not disagreeing with Hayabusa.
What hurts Hayabusa is the fact that Hayabusa was hurt.
Yeah,
Like his influence started to grow right when he got hurt. Because again, you think about again, Bix mentioned this, and I heard Bix and Zellner did a nice little Hall of Fame show where they mentioned Hayabusa, and they believe that he would have been a major player in Muto's All Japan. And
yeah,
I don't think that's incorrect, actually. I think he would have been. I think you would have seen him in TNA. I think that Hayabusa would have become a player here with total nonstop action wrestling, right? Because that would have been a perfect guy for him to bring in and use, and that guy would have gotten over because he's pretty much Sabu, like it's the same
hmm,
lot of similarities, and like Hayabusa's been someone that's had a major influence on a lot of the talent that are kind of in their prime today. A lot of them will cite what Hayabusa did. Like it just, I think influence matters a lot more sometimes than statistics. Like if people constantly cite how great you are and how much of an influence you are, I think that matters. And I think that I can be talked into Tagaki. I want to see more. I probably would vote for him next time, but I think that Hayabusa belongs just because of what he was. And like we got robbed a little bit of what he could have been.
Yeah, and I didn't have to be talked into Ishii, but John Muse talked me into
John used
being
it.
even more strong for him than I already was with his, and we talked about him earlier this week on the podcast. So I followed wrestling in Mexico. I abstained. You?
Me too. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, I followed wrestling in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. I also abstained from this one. Did you?
I abstained as well. There's some I could
Okay.
be talked into on that list, but at the end of the day, I was like, I just don't feel like I know enough about like maybe Dominic DeNucci because of the influence in Australia, but that's
Yeah.
just me parroting stuff that I've heard. So I didn't
And,
feel
and
it
I
enough.
I've done a lot of I did some reading on Spiros Arion,
Mhm.
whenever he was put on the ballot a few years ago. And then I've also I actually watched the documentary on Adrian Street, and then when he died, I read his obit that Dave wrote. But again, it was just one of those things. I don't know enough about the category to speak intelligently about it, so I just abstained.
Mhm.
Um,
That's fair.
now non-wrestlers, we get six, and this one was tough for me, but we're gonna go with it. I don't know why I was so fascinated by this category. I loved it, but six, we got Dave Brown, Memphis announcer, Bobby Bruns, Bob Caudle, Bobby Davis, Joe Higuchi, Jim Johnston, the WWE music guy, Larry Matisick, James Melby, Rossi Ogawa, Reg Parks, Morris Siegel, Tony Schiavone, George Scott, Senshiro Takagi, Mike Tenay, Ted Turner, Roy Welch, Stanley Weston, and the Grand Wizard. You get six.
I picked four. I took Ted Turner, Bobby Davis, Tony Schiavone, Reggie Parks, and I probably should have put Roy Welch on my list too. I might be reconsidering that. I'm not putting Roy Welch back on, but those are my guys that I chose.
Talk to me about Reggie Parks.
Reggie Parks is the reason why professional wrestling belts look the way they do. If you look at, because Reggie Parks was the belt maker, and he made
Yeah.
all the belts from our childhood that you think of were Reggie Parks designs. If you look at how title belts looked from the 60s and 70s and compared to what they look like in the 80s and 90s, there's a definite shift in design and size and what it looks like. And that's the influence of Reggie Parks.
Yeah.
Like all the belts that you can think of that you like, the winged eagle, right? Everyone but the big gold. Big gold was someone else, which again, the big gold belt looks completely different than any other wrestling belt before or since. Everything else is a Reg Park design. And Reggie Parks was great. He's influential. The belts, with the exception of the WWE, because they've gone away from that Reggie Park influence in their belt designs. Everyone else is definitely still influenced highly by Reggie Parks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at the AEW belt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, I had Dave Brown. Now I was just watching a JFK documentary because fucking of course I was watching a JFK documentary.
Yeah, it'd be a Mike
Yeah.
Gilbert thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bill Mercer was on there, by the way, because he was actually reporting on the ground. Now I need to do some research.
That's
But
cool.
yeah, well, and then so I checked. I put it in our chat with Muse. Just look at the tweet. Don't not right now, but look at the tweet. He was actually reporting on the ground from whenever the JFK thing happened.
I had
Now,
no
if
idea.
Bill Mercer is not in the Hall of Fame, we might have to create a case for him because I am very fond of his announcing. Just big fan of Bill Mercer. Dave Brown made me think of Bill Mercer, but I had Dave Brown. I had Larry Matisick for not only just for announcing, but for booking but influence. His book on booking has influenced a whole generation of bookers out there.
Tony Khan should refresh himself with it, by the way. Continue.
Yeah, Morris Siegel. And I had Roy Welch, Stanley Weston, and who was actually I think those are my five. I did not pick Ted Turner.
I think that's a
I
mistake.
and you know what I have a vote. I have a vote left. Here's why I didn't pick Ted Turner, is I felt like if I picked Ted Turner for owning a television company and putting wrestling on his station, then I would have to pick Universal. I would have to pick Warner Brothers Discovery. I would have to pick Anthem Entertainment. I have to pick Barry Diller and Dick Ebersol and all these other guys who put wrestling on their station, right?
You could pick Dick Ebersol. Dick Ebersol had influence.
There's probably, if Ted Turner goes in, I think there's a good argument for Dick Ebersol, to be honest with you.
No,
you know what I mean? So I just felt like he just wasn't in the business. He owned a television station and he owned a company, but he let everybody else do everything.
No, that's 100. I cannot tell you how much I disagree with that. Ted Turner
Let's go.
active. Let's do it. Hit the button.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to get it.
Brace for debate.
We haven't hit the button.
Let's go, JD. Go ahead.
Ted Turner actively chose professional wrestling. Right. Ted Turner wasn't Universal. You said I have to pick Universal. I have to pick Warner Brothers. Those are companies. Ted Turner was a maverick. Ted Turner ran Turner. Like TBS was the Turner broadcasting system. And everyone who worked for Ted Turner talked about what a pain in the ass it was to deal with him because he made all the decisions. Ted Turner didn't focus group his choices. Ted Turner went, this is what we're going to do because I feel it because I'm Ted fucking Turner. Right. Ted Turner liked wrestling. Yeah. Wrestling was part of WTCG from the beginning. And when WTCG becomes a superstation, professional wrestling goes with it. And that is the start of the boom. It's Ted Turner. It's Superstation TBS, right? And he fought for it, right? In an era, and when wrestling wasn't cool, he fought to keep it. People said, we got to get rid of this. This is stupid. No. We're not. We're keeping it. If Ted Turner doesn't get iced out of his own company, WCW never dies. That right there shows you the influence that the man had. One man had that kind of influence. The wrestling boom the wrestling war of the 1980s was fought literally on WTBS. For 1 year, 4 different companies fought to keep their programming on WTBS. Right. Ted Turner made the decision. Hey, Crockett's going down. We need wrestling. We're going to buy wrestling. Right. Ted Turner got annoyed with Vince one day and talked to Eric Bischoff and said, fuck this guy. Give me a wrestling show in primetime. That kind of power. Yes. Did Ted Turner wake up every day and decide, man, I need to make sure that we're doing this with our wrestling? No, because Ted Turner had other things he needed to do. He was that important. He's the single most important media player of his generation. No one had more influence than Ted Turner, and he actively decided to fight for wrestling because he liked wrestling. Did he go to the shows every week? Did he follow week to week? No. Ted Turner is one of those casual fans that we talk about, but one of those guys that was positive and knew what wrestling was, and knew what wrestling meant, and in his heart of hearts loved wrestling. Yeah. Just on that alone, what is pro wrestling like if Ted Turner doesn't take over his dad's billboard company and decide to move into television? The pro wrestling landscape looks vastly different.
You don't think it just got onto another station?
Nope, not the way
he's the one that chose it, but somebody else would have eventually.
Maybe not. We don't know that. Look at what wrestling. Look what wrestling is. Look what wrestling is. I mean, as far as ratings and stuff like that go, as far as ad dollars go, someone had to fight for it. Ted Turner the wrestling looks different. That doesn't play out the same way, right? And somebody else might have done it. Ted Turner did it.
Yeah,
and we have, and he is the one person outside of Vince McMahon that shaped where we are today. If we can't choose the people who shape the industry to be in the Hall of Fame that represents the sport, who can we choose? There's outside of Vince McMahon more important to the state of professional wrestling in the 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century specifically, than Ted Turner.
Oh, well, he definitely provided a platform. I don't know.
It's not, but I mean, he made the decision. Lots of people own TV stations. Lots of people air TV. Lots of people air wrestling, but only one Ted Turner.
Yeah, Ted Turner is one of the guys that aired wrestling along with the USA Network.
Because
who? And Dick
Ebersol. Who's the USA Network? Who ran the USA Network? Mike, tell me who ran it
in the 1980s.
Yeah, tell me who ran
his name. Jim Levinson Skillbridge.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think he never put his name.
Because there wasn't a guy. It's a conglomerate. It's a media thing.
It'd have been
It's
nice if
Ted
that guy
Turner
just if that guy named the network after himself, I'd probably know who it was, but his name was not Jim USA.
because he's not Ted Turner.
Yeah,
That's my
yeah.
point.
Look, hey, Ted Turner is a bad motherfucker in the media space, like TNT, TBS, Turner Classic Movies. Oh, and by the way, CNN like created it all, and he was the first one to put wrestling on a national platform. And he also had Matlock and Andy Griffith and Braves baseball. Like I don't should it go into the Baseball Hall of Fame? I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. He should go in the Baseball Hall of Fame
for having Braves
absolutely. He should
baseball
go.
on.
Yeah, no, for taking it and transforming it. Dude, I'm telling you, man, you're discrediting the importance of superstations in cable and how cable television transformed the television landscape and changed media rights and changed how these teams evolved and changed the sport. To ignore the impact that television has had specifically in the cable space in the 1980s and 1990s is to deny how the sport evolved. And Ted Turner's
Then we should put in.
Yes.
Then we got to add Dumont.
Yeah, 100% Dumont should be in the Hall of Fame.
Okay. Well, if that's what we're doing, then that's what we're doing. I just look at this and I'm like, these other guys were actively like either working on the shows, they're booking the shows, they're promoting the shows, and he was just like, this was just one of the jobs that he had. Right.
And he was awesome at one of the jobs, and he was awesome at all of the jobs he had. Put him in he should be in every television Hall of Fame ever. There should be a wing of the Ted Turner Hall of Fame in everything. Like the man had that much influence on everything.
Well, I think Ted Turner is awesome. I think he's a badass. I don't know if I'm going to vote for him. I can be like, but like I said, there's an open spot. I could be talked into it. I could be talked into Shivani. I could be talked into Mike Tenay. I think people devalue Mike Tenay because he was on TNA. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be the one to fucking burst everybody's bubble, but there for a while, TNA was the number 2 promotion in the entire world. Where did Memphis rank when Dave Brown was at his apex as the color commentator, right? In the world landscape. I don't know. Like they were pretty awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like,
why did you vote for Dave Brown?
Because I'm a fan. Probably, you know what I mean. And I love Memphis wrestling. When I was really young, I got introduced to Memphis wrestling in like the late 80s because they had that documentary about Andy Kaufman on Comedy Central.
Yeah, right? I love that thing.
And they would just show. Yeah. Dude, they had the documentary, and then they would just show all the stuff late night. So I got to hear Dave Brown and I got to hear Lance Russell's voice, right? And and then my dad got me some tapes of WCCW and Memphis wrestling. He bought me tapes from the flea market, and I wore those fucking things out. And then as internet come around, I would just sit there and watch Memphis wrestling for hours, like old Memphis wrestling on YouTube and stuff like that. And the Memphis Heat documentary is one of my favorite documentaries. That's probably me being like having an emotional attachment to Dave Brown. But I think if Dave Brown goes in, I think there's a great argument for a Mike Tenay, because Mike Tenay was the play-by-play man for the number 2 wrestling promotion in the world for about a decade. Right. And then he was also on WCW, and he had the hotline stuff early on. Right. He was, and the radio show. I think there's absolutely a place in the Hall of Fame for Mike Tenay.
I agree with you on Mike Tenay. I mean, I think Mike Tenay belongs in way more than Dave Brown does. Dave was the other guy on Memphis television. Everything you said totally justifies Lance Russell.
Well, fuck, I might switch my vote to Mike Tenay.
That's what I'm like. Yeah. I'm like, okay, you just totally justified why Lance Russell. Because Lance was the guy. Lance was the guy on Memphis. It was Lance and Lawler. Like Dave's the other guy. I'm like, this guy just fought me on Ted Turner, and he's fighting for Dave Brown. Like I think
I switched my vote from Dave Brown to Mike Tenay. I think I switched it.
That makes much more sense coming from you, because you just justified Mike Tenay up and down while trying to justify.
You know what? I think
was a weather guy. You're getting on Ted Turner for owning 27 businesses, but the weather guy gets in.
Well, yeah, but I did like Dave Brown. I don't know.
I like Dave Brown too, but I'm just like trying to understand the justification.
And I didn't vote Bob Caudle because I just never was a fan.
I didn't Bob really care for his, to be honest with you.
I never really cared. I believe I did say Bobby Davis. If I didn't, I meant to say Bobby Davis.
I knew you meant Bobby Davis. You didn't. We both we did that on the show. We're both pro Bobby Davis guys. I'm hard on Bob Caudle. I just don't think he's not Gordon. He doesn't stand over his contemporaries to me. He's
Yeah.
not better than Gordon. He's not better than Lance. He's the other
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. And then I felt like whenever on Starcade and stuff like that, whenever Mid Atlantic was coming up, I felt like they really were trying to get rid of him. You know what I mean? And like they just kind of
For a
kept him
reason.
around to be nice for a long time, and then he ends up
Mhm.
going to Smoky Mountain and doing stuff there in Smoky Mountain.
Yeah, and he
But you know,
sticks around.
I picked Stanley Weston just because of the magazines
The
and just how
Aftermags,
important the
yeah.
magazines were. You know what I mean? So I voted for him. So
No, I
but
voted
this
for Tony Schiavone for the same reason you voted for Dave Brown. I just like Tony
yeah
Schiavone. I'm not arguing.
yeah. Yeah. But this was by far my favorite category to talk about. I don't know why. I felt like this is so many different fascinating people on this category.
Yeah, there really is, and there's so much variance to talk about people. And again, I look back at it, I'm like, I picked Roy. I am picking Roy Welsh. I probably should have picked Morris Siegel. I think I actually missed him when I was going up and down the list because that's a
I
no-brainer right there. I mean, Morris
yeah.
Siegel should be in over Tony Schiavone, in my opinion. I love Tony,
Yeah.
but I can vote for Tony another time. Like Morris
Yeah.
Siegel ran Texas, right? Like
Dude,
Morris
for
Siegel was the
30
heart of Texas wrestling for 30 years before it gets like he's like Charlemagne. Like when he dies, they have to
Yeah.
split up the territory. That's when Blanchard got Southwest and Fritz got the North, and like it's like Game of Thrones after Morris Siegel dies.
Yeah, so he ran Houston. He ran Houston from 1929 to 1967. And
Long
it was
time.
one of the top territories in the country like during that entire era. And then of course Paul Bosch takes it over and it gets a little bit bigger after that. But Bosch, he brought in Bosch because the territory was down a little bit, and Bosch was very, very probably more important to the Houston territory than Morris Siegel. But Morris Siegel was absolutely like huge for the history of Houston wrestling. The problem is, and here's why he probably doesn't get a ton of votes. I actually, before we recorded this, was trying to do some research on him. It's actually hard to find a lot of information.
Like I was trying to say, there's hard to find a lot of information about Morris Siegel because he's old and there's not a lot of records about him. Mike froze, so I'll just continue this and bury his choice of Dave Brown over Ted Turner again because that's foolish and silly.
Yeah, sorry.
There you go.
Sorry,
Welcome
my
back.
Starlink went out. So yeah,
I just buried you while you were gone. No problems.
Yeah, there's not a ton of info about Morris Siegel out there, and I think I think somebody needs to kind of put something out there. That way we can get more information.
Well, here's the thing too: is like people didn't talk about a lot. A lot of promoters didn't talk about who they were. Some of them were out in front, like Kohler in Chicago. He had no problem talking about who he was. Vince McMahon Sr. was not nearly as like out front and open like with media stuff like his son would be in the later generation. Some promoters laid back, some promoters were out in front, depending on where you were. Like, I'm not sure how much of a media figurehead Sam Mushnick was in post-war St. Louis, for example. I don't know. I'd like to ask that question actually.
Yeah. So I think that's gonna do it for us. This was a lot of fun. I want to do this. I want to do this again next year, but I want us to have actual ballots. And if I get an actual ballot, like I'm going hard on my research. Like and I'm gonna have it like pretty much solid. You're not gonna be able to change my mind by the time I pencil it in. I'm gonna be pretty much set on it.
You ain't voting Ted Turner. You don't deserve a ballot, my friend. I don't know.
Oh, come on.
So
I don't even think Meltzer voted for Ted Turner, and it's his publication.
I know it's his freaking publication. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, but I do see the argument for Ted Turner. But
Mike Tenay too. I don't know why Mike Tenay did have a lot of influence. Like Mike Tenay educated our generation about what was going on in Mexico, right?
And for me and Japan too. Like
and Japan,
yeah. No, I think Mike Tenay, he's got the TNA stink on him, and that's all. And the newsletters and Dave's newsletter specifically was not kind to TNA in the past, and for good reason, right? Yeah. And I think that's always going to hurt him. I don't think Mike Tenay gets in this year, but if TNA brings him back this coming up February and he does kind of like non-routine appearances for that company, I think by this time next year he'll be in.
Well, neither you or I thought about the Von Erichs. We both thought the Von Erichs deserved it, but a lot of people don't think they do. But David thought that the movie might bring out a wave of votes for him. Like same with Orndorff. They thought the death of Paul Orndorff last year brought more of a wave of support for him. By the way, I think the guy who is in the biggest house show program in WWF history belongs in the Hall of Fame, no doubt.
Yeah.
Right? That seems to be a no doubt.
We didn't even talk about it because we'd already kind of had this conversation when he died, right? Like,
We did.
So yeah. I think it's a no-brainer. And you know what? Fucking HBO, if HBO would have actually put out that movie that they were supposed to make on Sputnik Monroe, he would probably be into the Hall of Fame. Do you remember when that rumor was going out there?
No, I have no memory of that.
There's a screenplay out there about Sputnik Monroe. HBO had got a hold of it. This is probably like 10 years ago, and they were going to put a movie out about it, and they just never made it to production. But the screenplay is out there. Yeah, the screenplay is out there. And then and so if they ever did make it, I think that he would probably go into the Hall of Fame. I think somebody needs to tell that story much better than what I have read and heard, and I think that he'll probably get in there.
I do. I think there's a fascinating story there. There's so many things about pro wrestling that get lost or that people don't want to touch because it's pro wrestling. And it's not like, I don't know if the Sputnik Monroe story is seedy enough, because like we'll look at the Von Erich. We're gonna go watch that Von Erich movie next month, and it doesn't get seedier. Right.
Yeah.
Like it's sleazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like not just like the Fritz is a sleazy human being. Like so wrestling tends to draw that kind of stuff. But that's a story that I think that should be shared more, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, I feel you. Well, Dave, if you do end up watching this, I'm going to email this to Dave once we publish. Dave,
great.
if you watch this, yeah, please give us a vote next year. I don't want to sound like I'm begging, but
we're pandering at this point, man.
We're pandering, but hopefully we get in, man. But this is a lot of fun. Hey guys, thank you for subscribing to the Patreon. We really appreciate it. Tell your friends to subscribe to us. We love doing historical content, and we got some more historical content coming your way. So just make sure to stay tuned there. And until next time, mahalo.